myself a notice. Calvin Castine in beautiful downtown Rouse's Point in late October 2009. And we're in the offices of the Cross Border Development Corporation and talking to Mr. Mark Barie. But we're not here to talk about CBC today. We're here to talk about another venture that Mark is off about. And we're here 2 years ago to talk to you about a book you'd written.
That's correct. Yeah, the book on Father Barie, and since then we've lost the man.
At the honor of being there at his funeral, and a heck of a turnout at St. Anne's Shrine. One of the most highly respected people in this region.
No doubt, and I think the fact that there were approximately 1,000 people there to bid their fond farewells to Father Barie is a testament to his life's work. I'm sure it surprised a few of his brethren in the priesthood also that he was so much loved and so popular. And candidly, if the weather had been a little bit better, I think that crowd could easily have doubled or tripled in size. But
I don't know where they would have parked or
yeah, we would have been on the state highway. But as I was telling you before we started rolling, the story of Father's life is completely sold out. We have no more books, but God bless his family. They've given me permission to write the final chapter, so to speak. So somewhere in between Upstate New York Tea Party and my business interests, I'm going to write that last chapter, and we'll let your viewers know as soon as the new revised book is available for them to purchase.
Now, I noticed you had the same initials. Now, that come into play when you decided who to write a book about?
Well, I never thought of that, but I think that's probably the only similarity. He was a living saint, and I believe he's a saint already. I'm not even close. Not even close.
Well, you were close to a saint.
Yeah, I was close to a saint. That's about as close to him yet. So thank you for the thought.
So even though you're sipping on a coffee right now, I think we're here to talk about tea.
That's correct. Yeah, the Upstate New York Tea Party, to be exact.
Okay. Now, I've seen through the various media that you've had a rally. Was it in Trinity Park? Was that the initial get-together?
As far as I'm concerned, that was the birth date and the birthplace of the Upstate New York Tea Party. I'm told that in April of this past year, there was a smaller tea party. But the one that was held on the 4th of July at Trinity Park in Plattsburgh was organized by a young fellow, married, father of four, Jonathan Nelson. And he somehow crossed paths with my son Oliver. And so Oliver ended up working on it, and as Oliver is wont to do, I ended up working on it. In fact, I was asked to make a few remarks at Trinity Park, and it was very exciting. It was a beautiful day. I was stunned that there were about 175 people in the park, probably closer to 200. Many of them brought their flags and their signs, all of them deeply concerned about the direction that our country is now taking. And when the event was over, a lot of people signed up. Almost all of them left us their mailing address or their email address. And the calls were almost universal. They didn't want it to stop on the 4th of July. They wanted something to continue, form an organization, continuing events, inform the people. And so a hop, skip, and a jump later, we decided to have an organizational meeting to see if we couldn't form a permanent organization, which has since been dubbed the Upstate New York Tea Party, the acronym, of course, spelling the word unity. We expected maybe 30 or 40 people to show up at our first organizational meeting. We were astounded when that little meeting room at the Chamber of Commerce, we packed 137 people in there. A lot of new faces that were not at Trinity Park but heard about the gathering. And thanks to Jonathan Nelson, who I'm now referring to as the father of the local Tea Party movement, we now have a Tea Party organization in the North Country, and our roster is already up to 400 people.
Wow. Now, two things on the Tea Party. I noticed on one of the news stations last night that there is a tour going on, a Tea Party tour. Is the local Tea Party in any way connected to, or is everything individual operation?
No.
How does this Tea Party stuff work?
The Upstate New York Tea Party, and we do have a steering committee that we're continuing to add to every day, which includes some very reasonable people, people like John Inelli, the former mayor of Plattsburgh, and a very successful businessman, Kirk Stallsmith, who is the general manager of Georgia Pacific, John Van Atten, who's with a local bank, People like Dr. John Middleton, who's probably the father of the local right to life movement, is on our steering committee. The steering committee made a decision very early on that the upstate New York Tea Party would not affiliate itself with any political party, would not endorse any candidate, and nor would we affiliate ourselves with any other Tea Party anywhere in the country. And that's not to say that there aren't worthy candidates, worthy political parties, or worthy Tea Parties, but in our formative stage, we wanted this organization to be truly local. We wanted the organization to learn how to walk before it ran, and that's what we're doing now. I think when we reach our fighting weight, so to speak, perhaps as early as the spring of 2010, then you will see us consider endorsement. You will see us perhaps affiliate with other organizations. But for now, we did not want either that advantage or disadvantage, depending on who you're talking about, and we're strictly on our own. The Tea Party activities that you're seeing here in the North Country, other than ours, are likely Dick Armey's group or others out of Washington or elsewhere in the United States, but we have no formal affiliation with any of them.
Okay, so you are using the name UNYTEA, UNYTEA.
That's correct.
So if you see a Tea Party thing, it may not.
It may or may not be ours. If you see Unity Party, then it is us.
Okay. Now, of course, the Tea Party, we all know where that name came from. Back when the Revolutionary War was just about to get going, there was the taxation without representation Tea Party, where a bunch of white people dressed up as American natives and Indians and threw the tea overboard because they didn't like the tax on the tea. So is the Tea Party about taxes?
The Upstate New York Tea Party has as its mission to advocate at the federal level only for less spending, lower taxes, and less government. And that is literally in a half a sentence what our mandate is. And so we've invited people of all walks of life, professionals, working people, moms, dads, elderly people, young people, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, and conservatives. If they believe as we do that we should have less spending, lower taxes, and less government, then they are welcome to join the Upstate New York Tea Party. We don't have a boat, much less the tea to dump into Lake Champlain. And although the issue is not exactly the same, taxation without representation, there are some of us in our group that could probably make the argument that A, we certainly have the taxation, and B, we're wondering out loud if we have any representation anymore in Washington.
Do they hear us?
Do they hear us even anymore? And so that is our mission. And as the Unity Party grows in strength and numbers, you'll see us taking on more of these challenges. As you might remember, the first one we took on was the healthcare reform proposals in Washington.
Okay. You took it on. What did you?
Well, the first thing we did was we invited all three of the congressional candidates in the upcoming special election for the 23rd Congressional District to appear at a special forum that was held in Plattsburgh to talk specifically about the healthcare reform proposals. And we were very pleased that the conservative candidate Doug Hoffman and the Republican candidate Didi Skosafava agreed to come. The Democratic candidate Bill Owens considered it, but then decided at the last minute not to attend. That was a big disappointment for me personally and for the organization. But several hundred people gathered. We received good media attention. And there was a tremendous give and take between both the candidates and the audience, who were allowed to ask questions. They wrote them on index cards. I served as the moderator. I believe every single question that pertained to healthcare was asked, although I noted there were a lot of questions that had nothing to do with healthcare, suggesting that we should probably have another forum of some sort. But getting all three candidates together at one time is extremely difficult. In fact, to my knowledge, it has not yet happened. Each of the candidates are already blaming the other for being unwilling or unable to appear on the same dais at the same time. But I think to an individual, the people at that forum would tell you that they learned a great deal on the candidates' stands. During that time, before, during, and after, the steering committee developed a white paper, if you will, for Unity on the subject of healthcare reform. And most recently, our position paper was published in the Press Republican. It's a very common sense, dollars and cents approach to healthcare reform, and we've received a great deal of positive feedback from that. We think we've contributed to the discussion, and we hope that not just Unity members, but voters throughout the North Country are better educated as a result, and when they go to the polling places this first Tuesday in November, they will choose wisely in accordance with what the candidates are saying about healthcare reform.
Okay. Thanks to Brian McBride at Plattsburgh.com, where our intent is, you and I are speaking right now, Brian is making me a DVD. He was there and recorded it. We plan to run the debate after you and I get done speaking here. And it'll also be available at Plattsburgh.com on the internet. So if you're unable to catch it here on Hometown Cable, or you have friends who don't have cable, or friends that live in Watertown that are in this congressional district, or Potsdam or Ogdensburg or wherever, if they have access to high-speed internet, they can catch that debate on the internet.
And two, I don't know if it's possible. If it's possible for the UNYTEA folks to buy some of these CDs, we will, and we will have them for sale at only our cost to any of our members, anybody else who wants them. We think it's important that they see at least these two candidates in action with respect to healthcare reform.
Okay, I'm sure we can arrange that if people want to do it for just to have as a souvenir, or for private gatherings or whatever. Just send to family somewhere. Not much time. We're running this program here close to the election, so
About a week and a half.
yeah, as we're taping this. Party, that is part of your name. Is it? It's not a political party, though, is it?
No, it isn't. Right now, we are a grassroots organization. We have been researching and are checking carefully into the possibility that we may have to register with the Federal Elections Commission as a political organization. But we are not a political party. We have no intention of fielding any candidates. Right now, we're just a grassroots. I don't even want to use the word lobby, because we're not that either. And we've been advised so far that we are not obligated to register either with the state of New York or the federal government. I suspect at some point we will have to choose one or the other and do this. We're also exploring into the possibility of incorporating, if for no other reason than for liability purposes. But right now, we're a group of locals. We've leased some software so we can keep track of our members and regularly communicate with them. And unintentionally raised a little bit of money. We've gone to a few things where people have passed the hat, and so we've already got a couple $1,000s in our kitty, but we've got some bills too that have to be paid. Again, as we grow in numbers, we'll get a little bit more organized in that regard. But right now, no, we're just a group of locals working hard to advocate for, as I said, less spending, lower taxes, and less government.
Okay, if there are people who are interested in either learning more or becoming active or whatever, how can they contact people?
Well, perhaps the easiest way is to visit our website. It's called UNYTEA.com, UNYTEA.com. They can also write to us at unity@yahoo.com, UNYTEA@yahoo.com, or they can call the toll-free line here at my offices, which is 800-545-8125. And I'm generally good about returning a phone call within 24 hours, and I'd be glad to spend some time on the phone with anyone who wants to learn more about UNYTEA. And they would be, if they wanted to, they'd be automatically added to our email list, our snail mail list, and get regular communications from us. We have no activity planned as of right now. We're talking about a get out the vote rally, or perhaps just a regular Tea Party meeting in the next couple of weeks, but we have no plans as of right now. If we do, we'll announce them quickly, I'm sure.
Okay, is there anything else, Mark, that you think the people should know about the organization?
Well, I think if I could say to your viewers one thing I would stress to them, perhaps what some of them already know, is that we feel a deep sense of urgency within the Upstate New York Tea Party about the direction in which our country is currently going. You know, I read the other day that just to meet our existing obligations with Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security and the drug prescription program, our income tax rates by the year 2050 would have to rise to 1/3 right across the board, simply to cover the obligations that we've already incurred. And that's before we build another fighter jet, before we construct another highway, or before we bail out another financial company.
Or replace the Crown Point Bridge.
Or replace the Crown Point Bridge, or the latest I've heard is a rooftop highway, which at least one of the candidates is advocating for. We can't keep doing that. The spending has to stop. And the vision that I have is that, and I know that there are organizations like us that have formed all across the country, and here in the North Country we have an opportunity to send to Congress someone who agrees with us, and a lot of our individual members are working in that regard, That has to happen over and over again around the country. You know, if you check at the House of Representatives, you'll discover they have a black caucus, they have a Hispanic caucus, they have all sorts of caucuses. I think it's time that we have a Tea Party caucus in the United States House of Representatives. We need this year, and they say the year 2010, to have 5 or 6 congressmen who will band together and say no to the spending, no to the increased taxes, no to more government. And then perhaps in 2 more years, when it's time to vote on Mr. Obama himself, we'll add to that little army, and maybe by then we'll have 20 or 24. And I think a Tea Party caucus in the United States House of Representatives could be the beginning of the end of this drunken spending spree that we've been on for so many years. Something has to give. Otherwise, we're going to bankrupt this country probably before some of us have left, and certainly well before our children have grown to adulthood.
Yeah, so as I approach the more advancing years, I worry more about my children and particularly the grandchildren and what they have to look forward to. And you know, I have to agree that we don't do something on a lot of different levels, and taxes are one of them. But there's other things too that we have to worry about. But that's not what the Tea Party is about. You're worried. You're basically, the Tea Party is taxing and spending.
That's right. And you know, we're
And
not
going to
alone.
go off on other tangents. It's not going to become
Well,
a cause for other things.
I'm sure as we get bigger and stronger, you know, we may be concerned about other issues, but our focus right now are the economic issues, the so-called pocketbook issues. We subscribe to, I think it was one of Bill Clinton's advisors who first said, it's the economy, stupid, and we believe in that. And so we're going to be focusing on that. But you know, we're not alone. You can go around the country, but you can go around the world. It's not being covered in the mainstream media, but the American dollar is losing its value every week. Gold is at record highs. There are rumors running around right now that we may go off the dollar standard in many respects, but the days where the United States dollar was the reserve currency of the world, the end of that is in sight. And let's hope that it doesn't happen. But when the European basket of currencies is given more respect by the International Monetary Fund than the American dollar, then you now know that they know what we know, which is we've got too much debt. We're not doing anything about it, and eventually our currency has to be devalued. Inflation will have to occur. Interest rates will have to rise. And when that happens, this splurge of spending will come to a grinding halt. We're already seeing it now, of course, in the state level. A number of states have deficit spendings. A number of states must make hard decisions now. Unlike the folks in Washington, they don't have the opportunity to print more money. And so they're going to have to make some hard decisions.
So they're printing more license plates right now.
Yeah, printing more money. That's another way of doing it. Yeah, you know that story too. So we'll be at it. We'll be at it for a while, and we hope that this election is an opportunity for the local people to make their voice heard and make a difference.
Okay, we've heard what Mark Barie thinks. If you're interested in becoming part of this movement and maybe even debating him at the Tea Party thing, maybe there's something you want to talk to him about that, as far as this. But if you want to find out what the candidates think, we're going to run that forum, hour and a half, probably.
Yeah, I think the forum went about an hour and a half. Again, we were tickled pink to be able to host it. I think people who watch it will learn a great deal, at least about those 2 candidates. And as one of my friends argued, they'll learn a great deal about the candidate who didn't show up.
Okay.
For that reason. And you mentioned debates. Actually, that's one of the activities being contemplated right now by the Upstate New York Tea Party. That we will, in the year that follows, because we get to do this congressional thing all over again in 12 months.
Yeah.
It's an unheard of opportunity in the North Country where we get 3 shots at the congressional apple within 3 years. And so one of the things we're contemplating is a series of debates around the congressional district. And yes, because I have the biggest mouth, I may be the one doing the debating about the various issues having to do with taxing and spending in government. And we'll make sure to keep your viewers informed about that.
Okay. So here's the forum again. Thanks to Brian McBride at Plattsburgh.com, and if you have access to the internet, you can watch this anytime you want. Just click on it and watch it at your leisure. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Gavin.
All right.
Welcome each and every one of you at tonight's Congressional Candidates Forum on Healthcare Reform. If you're not familiar with the Upstate New York Tea Party, we are a grassroots coalition of local people who advocate at the federal level for less spending, lower taxes, and less government. We are not affiliated with, I repeat, we are not affiliated with any political party, nor have we endorsed or intend to endorse or affiliate with any candidate for office. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we bring the candidates out. There are question cards that are circulating around with pencils. We're going to try to get to as many questions as we can from all of you. So if you haven't filled out a question but you'd like one asked, if you haven't filled out a question card, please do so, and one of the runners will bring it up here. Secondly, I'd like to thank Bob St. Eves, who couldn't be here tonight, because I think the first 100 of you that arrived received a free copy of the United States Constitution. Those were donated to us by Bob St. Eves, and I wanted to say thank you to him. At this time, if they're ready, Matt, are our candidates ready? We have them in holding tanks. The headphones are on. At this time, I'd like to introduce our congressional candidates, beginning with Didi Skosovava. And Doug Hoffman. I would like to point out that late yesterday afternoon, I did receive a call from Bill Owens' campaign. I did not speak with Mr. Owens. I spoke with one of his staffers who explained, or at least informed me, that Mr. Owens would not be here this evening. I'm going to be very candid. I'm very disappointed in that. I think there's a nice crowd here tonight, and I can't think of an issue more important to the people of North Country than health care reform. And I apologize that Mr. Owens is not here this evening. At this time, we'd like to begin our evening with the Pledge of Allegiance, if you would all stand. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. And now a little bit about the rules for tonight's proceedings. Each candidate will begin with an opening statement to last not more than 5 minutes. After that, we will begin with the questions, and each candidate will be given up to 3 minutes to answer that question. By a previous toss of the coin, Mrs. Skosovava has earned the right to speak first for their opening statement, and we've asked the candidates to remain seated and be comfortable. The microphone is right in front of you, Didi. You can just help yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? All right. It's great to be here this evening with all of you, and I just would like to share a little bit of my background with you before we get started in this discussion here this evening about health care. The reason I got involved in politics at all is I reached a point in my life, and if you don't mind, I'm going to stand, that I found that I was whining and complaining about decisions that were being made. And I got to a point that I decided I needed to either put up or shut up. I either needed to get involved or I needed to just go along. And at that point, I ran for village trustee of my hometown, which is the village of Governor. After that, I became the mayor of the village of Governor. At that time, we had a deficit. I turned that deficit around to a surplus. I then ran for the state assembly. But let me tell you something. We're at a point right now that regardless of what party you're in, people are tired of politicians putting partisan politics ahead of the best wishes and the intentions of the people that they represent. We are at that point. I've spent the last 11 years in the assembly. There are various things at times. I'm an independent thinker. I think for myself. I don't kowtow to party bosses. That means sometimes I'm not the most popular person around in political circles, but I stand up for what is right. I never forget the people that put me in office. No one in Albany votes for me there. It's the people back home that do. I've had the pleasure of representing the people of the 122nd Assembly District. This year we had a budget that spent too much, taxed too much, regulated too much. I voted no on that entire budget. Why? Because we can't afford it anymore, and that is not the way to stimulate the economy. It's not the way to try to turn business around. When you look at all the fees this year, it's way too much. So tonight we're here to talk about another important issue, health care, and the issue of health care reform. And it's been my philosophy all along. My mother told me a long time ago, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them proportionately. And if you are going to serve the people, make sure you listen to what the people have to say. So I want to listen to the insights you have, as well as share with you some of my viewpoints about the ongoing discussions on healthcare reform.
Thank you, Dee Dee. And now the opening statement from Mr. Hoffman, 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And I want to thank the Upstate New York Tea Party for hosting this healthcare forum tonight. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to participate. Can't hear you. Okay, I'll talk clearer then. Thank you. As you can tell, I'm not a politician. I'm unaccustomed to large crowds, and I'm not very good at backslapping or meaningless banter that seasoned politicians have mastered. I'm a CPA, for goodness sakes, but I'm also a family man with lifelong roots in the region. I'm an Army veteran and an Olympic organizer. I'm a volunteer, etc., just like many of you in this room. If you want polish and pizzazz, I'm not your guy. But if you want someone who will bring common sense back to Washington, that's me. If you want someone who will question every single spending bill that comes before me, and if you want someone who isn't going to take orders from the party bosses, that's me. Because you see, in my mind, you are the boss. And isn't it about time we send someone to Washington who will remember that we work for you and not the other way around? Until recently, I never even considered running for office. I just reached a point where I was fed up with Congress and the direction of our country, that I felt someone had to step forward and do something about it. It's clear to me that if we're ever going to change the direction of our country, career politicians and trial lawyers are not the answer. I believe we need to stop wasting billions each year on wasteful earmarks and favors to special interest groups and political allies. My opponents do not. I believe growing federal deficits are ticking time bombs that, if left unchecked, will destroy our economy just as surely as they destroy family budgets. And I believe the projected $9 trillion deficit over the next 10 years will bankrupt us, our children, and our grandchildren. I believe the tax code is corrupt and must be changed. And that's coming from a CPA. My opponents do not. I believe that the onerous government regulations and red tape stifle the economy and businesses and kill jobs. My opponents don't get it. I have signed the Americans for Tax Reform pledge to vote against any tax hikes, and I have signed the Freedom Works pledge to stop earmarks. Both my opponents have refused. It shouldn't take a CPA and business development specialist to go to Washington to explain to folks that wasteful spending, growing deficits, and higher taxes are wrong. But I guess it does. And so here I am. I'm not running because it's a step up in the ladder for my political career or because I want the title to pad my resume. I'm running to change the direction of our country, to save our freedoms, liberties, the free enterprise system, and our pursuit of happiness. If you really want to stop the reckless spending in Washington, you're going to have to fire some politicians. If you're tired of special interest groups and the backroom deals, you're going to have to fire some lawyers. And if you think you're up to it, now is the time. You have 3 choices on November 3rd, a politician, a lawyer, or me. Choose one of them and nothing's going to change. Choose one of them and it's going to be business as usual. Or you can choose me and we can begin the effort to turn this country around and give to our children and our grandchildren what we were once given: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. With your support, we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our first question is for Mrs. Kosovava. Given the President's acknowledgement that hundreds of billions of dollars in Medicare inefficiencies and waste and abuse are occurring, would you pledge tonight that you would not sign, and in fact you would vocally oppose, any health care bill that would include additional taxes, fees, or penalties? I can repeat the question if you wish.
Can I just read it, please?
Yep, you can try.
Thank you.
This first part. I just did the first part.
Yeah, this question says a little more than what you, there's a lot more in this question.
Well, just one question at a time. If you
Oh,
wanna do
you
both,
want,
go ahead.
okay.
Yeah.
Given the President acknowledges hundreds of billions in Medicare inefficient waste and abuse, would you pledge tonight that you would not sign and vocally oppose any health care bill that would include new additional taxes, fees, and penalties on individuals and businesses? And I have to say, yes. I think with the whole health care discussion right now, when we look at it, what we're looking at is talking about spending millions, billions of dollars on a plan that we haven't started to look at what the real root problem is. We haven't explored the systemic problems in healthcare that deal with the costs. So before we go taxing and adding additional fees on whether it's individuals or businesses, what we need to do is see what we can to become more competitive and take costs out of the healthcare system. A couple things that I think we can do: tort reform. I've sponsored tort reform in the state legislature for years, and we keep trying to push tort reform. That is one thing that we need to do to see if we can take some of the costs out of providing health care. We know the doctors pay exorbitant medical malpractice fees. Another thing we have to do is see what we can do about opening up the markets for insurance. Can we sell insurance products across state lines? Now, having said that, that is not a simple thing to do because there are regulatory hurdles that we'd have to work through. But yet I think that's something that can be done to try to bring down the cost, increase the competition of private insurance. So before we start talking about taxing people more, adding fees, adding new regulations, let's see what we can do to get to the systemic root of the problem with health care. And some of those things are what I just enumerated. Tort reform, making private insurance more competitive. That's a couple of ideas.
Can I have that card?
Yeah, sure.
I can't take my job as moderator. He gets the
there you
right now. I'll repeat it again for Mr. Hoffman. Given the President's acknowledgement that hundreds of billions of dollars in Medicare inefficiency and waste is occurring along with abuse, would you pledge tonight that you would not sign and in fact would vocally oppose any health care bill that would include any additional taxes, fees, or penalties? Mr. Hoffman, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I would absolutely vote against any bill that would have a tax increase, hidden fees, or any penalties. As I mentioned, I already signed the Americans for Tax Reform pledge to vote against any more taxes, and certainly in that area. And we have to look at the health reform bills that have been coming forward from the Democrats, and they're estimating that they're going to cost close to $1 trillion over the next 10 years. And if they're going to cost money, somebody has to pay for it. And the only way you can pay for it is with taxes, hidden fees, and penalties. And so I would absolutely avoid or vote against that, and I would pledge that again with my Americans for Tax Reform pledge not to increase taxes.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. The next question, Mrs. Kosovava. Do you believe that health insurance should be mandatory in the United States? Why or why not?
No, I do not believe that health insurance should be mandated. I think I am one that believes in individual choice. I think mandates are the root of a lot of problems that we have today in government spending, government mandating in lots of different areas without providing funding. Whether you look at municipalities, whether you look at school districts, and now we're going to add another level for healthcare. I do not believe that it should be a mandate.
Mr. Hoffman, did you get the question? Do you believe that health insurance should be mandatory? Why or why not?
No, it should not be mandatory for the same reason. Americans are used to choice. That's one of our freedoms and liberties. And as I said before in my speech, that I am against more and more government regulations and red tape. And to be forcing people to have insurance is taking away their choice. Some people opt out of the insurance system because they are young and healthy, or they know that if they do come down with anything, they can pay for it as they go along. To tell them that they have to have insurance is taking away their freedoms.
Both of you are staying well within the 3 minutes. I'm ready to vote for both of you. Thank you very much for doing that. Our next question. Would you support a health care bill if it included a provision which prohibited taxpayer monies from paying for abortion? Would you support a health care bill if it included a provision to prohibit taxpayer monies for paying for abortions? Mrs. Kosovala.
Can I just see the wording of the question again? Thank
You
you.
don't trust me, do you?
No, it's just that one.
I'm getting big money to do this.
No, I just want to make sure I answer this accurately for the people that have taken the time to listen to me this evening.
Well, I try to clean up the people's grammar while I'm at it, too.
No. Would you support a health care bill if it did not have a provision to prohibit taxpayer money from paying for abortions? As most of you know here in the room this evening, that I am pro-choice. And whether or not you agree with that stance, I have to say that I'm not sure when you look at a health care bill, they're talking about different levels of services that would be provided in different bills. And I have to say I would not discriminate against a person on the basis of their income. So if that's what this question is, you'll find one thing with me. If you ask me a question, I'll answer it. And it is what it is. I'm a pro-choice candidate. And I believe that a person should not be discriminated. If a service is going to be provided, it should not be discriminated on the basis of their ability to pay. Now, that's a very different question than asking whether or not that should be provided in any sort of level of basic health care service that the government is talking about providing.
Mr. Hoffman, would you support health care reform if it included a provision which prohibited taxpayer monies from being spent on abortion?
Yes, I would. I am a fiscal conservative, and I realize that many constituents in this district have a moral problem with taxpayer funding of abortion, and so do I. There's over 40% of Medicaid is paid in New York State for abortions, and the present Democratic health care bill does not mention anything about paying for abortions. By not mentioning it, the Medicaid portion could go to 100%. And I think any bill that goes through, it's important that the language be in there that there will be no taxpayer funding for abortions.
I just want to remind the audience that this forum is on health care reform, and I'm getting a lot of great questions, but many of them are not on health care. So unless the candidates give me leave to start straying, I'm going to stick to the health care forum questions. I hope you don't mind. This was touched on earlier, but it's one of the questions. Defensive medicine, that is ordering tests and procedures for legal reasons rather than medical reasons, is now estimated to cost $200 billion each year. What would you do about runaway juries and tort liability reform? What would you do about runaway juries and tort liability reform?
Can we switch order?
You're the boss. You take all my cards, you can move the order around too.
Thank you. One of my positions is also tort reform. Tort reform is simply setting reasonable limits for damages and would go a long ways to bringing our health care costs down. And I'm definitely for that, and I believe that we have probably 20 to 30% of our health costs goes to malpractice insurance that the doctors and the hospitals and the health providers have to pay. And the reason for that is the unreasonable damage awards that are given by courts around this country that drive up the cost of the malpractice insurance. And anything that drives up the cost of operating will eventually be passed on to the consumer, which is us. Lawsuits have created chaos in the healthcare industry. Doctors are practicing defensive medicine. And it's said that there's over $36 billion a year spent on defensive medicine. So by having tort reform, we can eliminate that out of our cost structure and eliminate the expenses that are unnecessarily made just to protect the doctors and the hospitals and the healthcare providers. So in order to have effective tort reform, it's very necessary to get that done, eliminate the defensive medicine, and it's going to bring down everybody's costs in two ways, through the malpractice insurance and the defensive medicine expenditures.
Thank you. Next question. It's been said over and over again by the administration. I'm sorry, go ahead. See, you switched the order and that's all it took to confuse me.
I support tort reform. It adds expense to the healthcare industry. You know, the other thing it does is when you look at the cost of medical malpractice, we have a problem here in the North Country, and that's recruiting doctors to our area. Whether it's surgeons or OBGYNs or doctors or primary care providers, we have a difficulty recruiting people to our area. And what happens when we do not put tort reform in place is it makes it more difficult to attract providers. And that's another problem with healthcare right now. I mean, making sure we have access to affordable care. And if you have access, that means you have to have providers. And if providers come out of medical school with $250,000 or $275,000 in loans, and then you tack on that in their first year, they're paying $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 in medical malpractice, and that might be for a general practitioner. That's pretty expensive with that type of overhead. So tort reform is something that we need to do. I've sponsored legislation for tort reform in the state assembly. It's a difficult thing to try to push in this state, but I think it's necessary not only in this state, but in this nation.
Okay, well, I would have liked to have a lawyer in the room to answer that question. Ooh, wait, he's not here. Okay. Sorry. It's been said over and over again that if you like the insurance you have, you'll be allowed to keep it. But now it appears that Medicare Advantage would be gutted, if not disappear altogether, as a result of proposed cuts in Medicare. If the proposed cuts in Medicare are enacted, what are your thoughts on this? I'll repeat the question. It's been said that over and over again, if you like the insurance you have, you'll be allowed to keep it under this new healthcare reform proposal. However, now it appears that because of cuts in Medicaid, Medicare Advantage could be gutted or perhaps even made to be disappeared altogether. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think we can fund any sort of health care reform on the backs of Medicare. It is way, way too expensive and too important of a program, and we're talking about spending way too much. We're just robbing from Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. I would have to ask, how many of you in your audience like the health insurance you have right now? If you could just raise your hand. And how many of you would like to be able to keep what you have right now? I think you should be able to. Again, I don't know what the hurry is to totally change healthcare in this nation. I think there are reasons. Now, having said that, I think there are real problems with the current state of healthcare. But I think there are steps that we can take first to try to contain the costs before we go totally revamping an entire system and changing the system and perhaps diverting you away from plans that you like. I think we need to take reasonable steps first. I also think, I'm not quite sure what the hurry is. I understand they're talking about potentially voting on this legislation in the next 2 weeks. You know, and at this point, the plans have changed and the bills have changed, and I'm not sure that everyone in Congress has even had the time to review the legislation and understand. And when you look at the fiscal note of the bill, and the fiscal note is how are you going to pay for it, it's not clear. It's not clear. Are you going to tax benefits? Are you going to assess a penalty for any employer that doesn't provide insurance? what are you going to do? So how do you put in a whole new program without responsibly even having answers of how you're going to fund it?
I think what the question is being directed at is President Obama saying that there's $120 billion worth of waste and fraud in the Medicare and Medicaid system. If that's what the question is being addressed, I have the feeling that we don't pass a bill expecting to pay for that bill with pie in the sky. If there's $120 billion worth of waste in the system, let's find it. And let's not take away the benefits of the people on Medicare and Medicaid if that's what they're talking about with that $120 billion. And I believe, as Dee Dee said, we need to protect the people that have insurance now. We shouldn't be diluting your benefits by a bill that passes, taking your benefits away and giving them to somebody else that doesn't have insurance. So everybody that has insurance, including Medigap insurance, should have the same benefits under any law that's passed, and it shouldn't be diluted.
Thank you.
Could I just add one brief thing to that? Because I don't think I've used my 3 minutes anytime.
You're going to make me crazy, Dee Dee. Go ahead.
Okay, then I won't.
No, I think if we start, it's going to get out of hand. I've got tons of questions, so
That's fine.
I'll give you the full 3 minutes from when you want it. How's that?
Okay.
Thank you. Next question. What measures would you take to ensure that illegal aliens do not receive government-sponsored health care or continue to overload our existing health care system? What measures would you take to ensure that illegal aliens do not receive government-sponsored health care and continue to overload our existing health care system?
Well, first of all, in the State Assembly, I vociferously opposed any sort of license for illegal immigrants. If we're having difficulties providing health care to our own citizens, I do not believe that we should be providing health care to illegal immigrants. The problem comes in this bill. They say that there is no provision for providing health care for illegal immigrants. I think the problem comes when someone shows up at a hospital emergency room. What is the hospital to do at that point? Do they have to provide care at that point? I do not believe that it should be part of a health care bill. I think we should only be providing coverage for citizens or people that are here legally.
I would agree with that, but there's one major problem, and it's our Constitution. The 14th Amendment provides equal protection under the law and due process. So the definition of a resident is a resident and not an illegal alien, so we have a problem. And this isn't what I'm supporting, I'm just mentioning facts here. This is the problem, is that Obama says his legislation will not include provisions to make illegal aliens eligible for the health care or ineligible. The problem, again, comes down to the 14th Amendment, is that we have a situation that you're a resident and you're not illegal until you're proven illegal. And so if somebody does show up at the hospital, they will have to be treated like any other resident unless he's been convicted or she has been convicted of being an illegal alien. And that's why the present health care bills that I've heard that are silent on it, that I believe is a Democratic trick into getting the bill passed, and then we're saddled with the additional costs, which we already are because of the 14th Amendment. So the problem is not going to be solved by being silent. It's just a way that's going to increase the cost after the bill passes. And the only way we're going to solve that problem is to go and do something about illegal aliens and try to clean up that problem, because they will be part of our costs with or without a new bill.
This next question addresses competition between insurance companies, and it's going to have to rework it a little bit. It says, should there be full competition between the 1,300 insurance companies in the U.S., regardless of what states they're in, by passing a federal law that overrides state laws? So I guess you can interpret that two ways. Do you favor a law that would allow that competition, or perhaps just your thoughts on it, whatever you want?
and I think I've already answered this question, I do favor a law that would provide for greater competition across state lines of insurance companies. It does pose, though, a problem, or something to be considered, in that every state or most states have insurance commissions, and in order to sell a product in an individual state, you have to go through a process for your product to be approved. So we'd have to find ways to jump over that regulatory hurdle, but I think the benefits far outweigh any sort of hurdles we'd have to jump over. Anything we can do that fosters competition amongst private insurance companies is something that has the potential to bring costs down. And I think that's any sort of policy that would promote that, I would be in favor of.
There are over 1,300 insurance companies providing health insurance in the United States, but we only have access to a few due to federal and state regulations. In New York State in specific, we have an insurance department that's one of the most stringent in the United States. It's very difficult for insurance companies to get New York State Insurance Department approval to sell products in New York. I know that while I was earning my MBA, I worked full-time for an insurance company. And I know that they had very few products in New York because they couldn't pass the regulations. This comes back down to regulations and red tape that prevent businesses from competing and having fair competition, which reduces your choice. And I have the same feeling. We need competition, we need choice in the free enterprise system to make it work. And basically, state insurance departments worked back in the 1850s, 1900s, and maybe even the 1950s. But in the 2010, they don't work. They hinder free enterprise and competition, and that's why we don't have a lot of competition, driving down the prices, increasing the quality of what's offered to you. And again, red tape and regulations prevent that from happening. Insurance should be portable from employer to employer, from state to state. And that's not happening in the United States, and it's a shame, and it should happen.
I think this next question could have come from any one of the 200 people that are here this evening. Why are we attempting to reform health care when it's the United States Congress that is in need of reform? Go ahead, Barie. That's a softball. You can hit that right aside.
I'm not sure if that was a question or an answer.
It's a question.
It's a question. And I think I've talked about a couple points here. I'm not sure what the rush is. Do we have a problem with escalating costs of health care? Yes, I believe we do. Are there steps we can take that are reasonable, that everyone can agree upon, without all the rhetoric, to try to take some of the costs out? And I talked about those. Competition across state lines, talking about tort reform. You know, the one thing I didn't mention, but what about the redundancy of paperwork? I visited a hospital the other day. Every box represents a report that they have to file. Some of it's totally redundant with just little nuances in it to make, you know, probably justifying some bureaucrat's existence. So you've got all these boxes, and it takes maybe 5, 6 people working to provide all the reporting, and if you don't provide the reporting and you don't provide it accurately, you don't get reimbursement. I'm not sure why we're taking a system and totally trying to overhaul it before we look at the systemic reasons of what's wrong with it. It does not make sense. It does not make sense. And before we drastically overhaul something, I think it would make a little more sense to try to find some common ground to control the costs.
Mr. Hoffman, I'll repeat that. Why are we reforming health care when it's the United States Congress that needs reforming?
Well, I guess I'll answer the first question, why. I think it's the Obama administration and the Democrats that are trying to ram it through, and they're trying to do it while they have a majority. And that brings up the question of why we should change Congress. That's exactly why we should change Congress, is because We need to get our freedoms back. We need to get spending under control. We need to reduce government regulations and red tape. And yes, we need to probably look at health care along the way, but it shouldn't be rammed through just because somebody has an agenda and wants to do it in the next 2 weeks. What we're going to end up with is a mess. We're going to end up with something that we're all going to pay for forever. It's like giving an employee an extra holiday. Once you give it to them, you can't take it back. Once you pass a bill and people have benefits, try taking that back. It doesn't work. So what we have to do is we have to do it slowly. And just because the Democrats have an agenda, we can't just let it go through. And we need to change Congress, and we need to keep this seat with a conservative view, and a view that's going to cut taxes, cut government spending, and cut government red tape and regulations.
What would you do about the shortage of doctors and nurses in the United States?
Just recently, we had a program that tried to attract doctors in rural areas in exchange for their forgiveness on some of their medical school loans. It's a very difficult issue, and we talked about it before. How do you attract doctors? And then once you get certain specialties, if you're in a hospital and you've got one surgeon, how do you get another surgeon to provide backup? It's difficult to try to figure out how we're going to do that. Especially when people come out of medical school with high loans, a lot of loans. So I think what we have to do is look at what types of incentives are we providing people as they go through medical school, and offer them incentives to come into areas that are more rural, and those types of programs. The other thing we have to do is look at general practitioners and look at the amount of money that they have for loans when they come out. And usually their debt is so high that they have to look at going on and becoming specialists in certain areas. So I think we have to provide some sort of assistance to make sure that we have general practitioners that can serve people in communities.
I work as a volunteer on the Adirondack Medical Center's Board of Directors, and I'm on their finance committee. I'm also a CPA that works with many doctors throughout the district. And I know a lot of the problems that they're facing in trying to make ends meet and break even, let alone make a profit. Basically what we have going on in the North Country, in the rural areas, is that we have price constraints that's put upon us by the Medicare and Medicaid system and the insurance companies. We have a lower reimbursement rate up here than they do in Albany or New York City or any of the major cities in New York State. That is what's hurting us to get competitive and offer doctors jobs up here, or any healthcare professional. We're being squeezed by the system. And that's why we have to resist any public option that the Democrats are trying to push through Congress. Because any public option that comes into play is going to be set up so that the insurance companies fail, and eventually we'll all be on public option. And once we go with socialized medicine, we all live close enough to the Canadian border that we see many Canadians, even though they have free health care, coming down here to get health care. Why is that? Because under their system, they may have to wait 6 months to a year to get help, even if it's a fatal disease. And even if it isn't, to get the quality of care that you have in the United States, it is not available. And that's why many people come from many different parts of the country or other countries to get U.S. health care. But back to rural health care and doctors. We can't compete because we're being pressured in the lower reimbursement rates by Medicare, Medicaid, and the insurance companies. And that's what's not fair about the system. The free enterprise system needs to work. And again, government regulations, red tape, and even throw in the insurance companies are making it happen. And go a step further, when you have Medicaid and Medicare being the lowest reimbursement rates of any of them, it's like a professional that charges $100 an hour, but the government comes in and says, I'm going to pay you $60. Guess where I have to adjust my rates to break even? Probably $110 or $120 an hour to the public, because I have to absorb the government that's forcing the lower rates on me. And that's what's happening with Medicaid and Medicare, and that's squeezing the entire country that way, and all of us are paying for that extra cost.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. If you go to Washington, will you promise to get for all of us the same great health care and insurance that you will have as a United States Congressman?
I hate to tell you, but I don't even know what the health insurance is for a member of Congress. I'm not sure what that is, but I can tell you that we have good insurance, pretty good insurance in the state assembly, and I would hope we would be able to provide the same type of coverage for anyone that I represent. So I'm not sure what a member of the U.S. Congress has for health insurance. So do you know, Doug? Have you studied that?
No, I have no idea. As I said 3 months ago, I didn't even consider running for an office, let alone I don't even know what a congressman makes or what their benefits are. But I certainly want to get to Washington because of the fact that I want to change the system. And again, I want to cut spending, less government regulations, and less taxes. And I think that, unfortunately, people in the private enterprise system don't have benefits as great as some public employees have. And I think that that's a shame, because if the public was treated as a for-profit enterprise, they would be looking at what everything costs before they spend the money. And I think that's the major problem with all government, is we're spending our money and it doesn't matter because it's just money. But if it's your money and you treat it as your money, which I will do in Washington, I'm going to be very careful on what we spend on anything and make sure it's well necessary to run our government.
Dee Dee, this member of the audience says, how do we stop the runaway train? It sounds like the health care reform bill is a done deal. What can we do to slow down this process before the bill is pushed through?
I think we have to pressure our members of Congress, our U.S. senators. We have to try to get the viewpoint across that, listen, we're going way too fast on this. It's not that people can't agree there needs to be some changes, but let's have a discussion about what's going on here before we commit to spending as much money as we're talking about spending, especially when there's not a clear fiscal note of where the money's going to come from. I'm not sure how we stand up and how we ask those questions, but I think we have to. And I can tell you one thing. In the state legislature, I've never been afraid of asking questions or standing up, calling for reform. I can tell you that back when everything happened with former Governor Spitzer, that whole situation, I got so angry with it that I wrote an entire letter to all of my colleagues and just said, hey, we've got all these shenanigans going on in Albany. This was published in several papers. It also went out as a mail piece. And what I said was, you got all these shenanigans and games going on in Albany, and you got people back in the districts that are trying to figure out how to pay their property taxes, how to provide for medicine, how to get their health care covered, how to get their kids through college. I mean, you have all these commitments that we need to be doing in the state legislature, and all these shenanigans. I'm not afraid to stand up when someone needs to stand up and say enough is enough. Now, I'm only one person, but I'm not afraid to buck the tide. I'm not afraid to be independent. My colleagues know that. We've stood together on various instances. This year, we did what we could in voting no on this entire budget that increased spending, that increased taxes, that increased regulations. We voted no. We debated it. We discussed it. We got our points across. We voted no. We were outnumbered. We were outnumbered. But all I can do is be as effective as I can be in saying no, trying to reform government. And we've made gains. We have made some gains. But since the first year I've been in the state legislature, I've called for reform. Less partisan politics, more putting the people's business first. So how do we do it? I think we just say slow down. Slow down. Slow this train down. Let's find things that we can find common ground on, whether it be tort reform, increasing competition amongst insurance companies, trying to do what we can on the cost containment side of things.
It's important that everybody in this room take action, and I know you have taken action just by forming the Upstate New York Tea Party and the other groups around the country that have done the same thing over this summer, has given Congress and the senators notice that if they pass this, they're going to have to answer back to their constituents. And that's very, very important. If you hear on the news that they're going to try to ram it through in the next 2 or 3 weeks, flood your congressman and your senator with everything you possibly can to tell them that if they vote for this, they're going to have to answer to you. Everybody in Congress will run for re-election in 2010. Let them know that if they pass a bill that's going to cost you money, increase taxes, increase fees, increase penalties, dilution of your insurance benefits, or anything else, that you're going to hold them accountable and they're going to be replaced. That's the best medicine, and it's the power that we have in the people and the voters, and we have to start using that more effectively. And I congratulate this organization because the message is coming through loud and clear, and it did in August during recess time around the country. And I'm proud of you, and I think that's what has to be done. These politicians have to know that they work for you and they answer to you, and hold them accountable and get after them. Thank you.
This member of the audience says, you both seem to have the answers, but as a minority, or should be a member of the minority in Congress, how can you hope to be effective? As a member of the minority in Congress, how can you be effective?
I've been in the minority in the state assembly, and you learn what you need to do to get things done. And I've been able to sponsor over 374 pieces of legislation in the state assembly. I went statewide on a particular bill. It's not related to health care, but it talked about civil commitment, where sexual predators that show proclivities to continue to molest young children or at the end of their prison terms, if they're deemed to be a risk to society, are continue to be incarcerated. I went around the state and pushed that issue. And guess what? Finally, we got a bill that passed. You just have to have the will to get things done. On the floor of the assembly, when it comes to gun control legislation, we debated for 5 hours against it to get our points out there. It's difficult being in a minority. It's hard, but you don't give up. You make your points and you keep pushing. And plus, I'm not sure we're going to be in a minority in Congress for long. I think in time, and with what's going on, because after the health care reform, we're talking about regulating the financial markets, adding another layer of regulation there. After we add another layer of regulation to the financial markets, we're going to look at the chemical industry and see what we can do to regulate there. How much more can we regulate? I'm just not sure. We can't. So if I am in the minority, I know how to work across party lines. I know how to try to get things done. I have had bills that have passed. You just have to get things done. And you have to remember, once you're elected, you represent the people that put you there. You do the work of the people that put you in office. It's a very simple equation. Nobody votes for you in Washington. Nobody votes for you in Albany. It's the people that, from the district, that elected you. and you have to make sure that their voices are heard.
We will be the minority in Congress this year. But I believe that groups like this and groups around the country are going to be watching this election, because this election is going to show that we can turn the tide, and we're going to send a conservative to Washington that believes in cutting taxes, cutting spending, and cutting government regulations. And next year, 2010, when all of Congress reruns for their seats, I believe people like me and you, who are fed up with what's happening in Albany and Washington, will step up to the plate just like I'm doing this year. And we'll see a lot more people getting into Congress, and we're going to turn the tide, and we won't be in the minority for long.